Most people look at a tiny 1971 Datsun 1200 and assume it has no business lining up at a drag strip, let alone winning anything. After all, how could a featherweight economy car with barely 70 horsepower possibly embarrass machines built for raw speed? Yet that's exactly what happened, and the story behind it continues to divide enthusiasts. Some call it skill, some call it luck, and others insist there had to be something extra going on under the hood. Whatever the truth is, one thing is certain. This unassuming little Datsun didn't just show up. It stunned everyone who watched it run. The unlikely drag strip legend. The year is 1971, and the setting is the local drag strip on a humid Friday night. The air is thick with the heavy scent of unburnt high-octane fuel and the acrid smoke of burning rubber. This environment is the undisputed kingdom of displacement. The staging lanes are dominated by the icons of the era, machines defined by brute force and heavy iron. You see Chevelle SS 454S, Hemi Cudas, and Mustangs lining up at the Christmas tree. When they launch, the ground shakes physically. It is a visceral experience of thunderous noise and raw power, where speed is calculated in cubic inches and success is measured by how much smoke you can generate off the line. Then, the noise dies down for the next pair of competitors. Rolling into the burnout box is something that fundamentally does not belong in this arena. It is tiny, boxy, and unassuming. It looks like the vehicle a librarian uses to buy groceries, not a machine built for the quarter mile. It is the 1971 Datsun 1200. The crowd in the bleachers chuckles. In a world of 400 cubic inch V8 engines, this vehicle looks like a toy. It appears to be a mistake, a budget commuter car that got lost on its way to the supermarket and ended up in the staging lane next to a Camaro. If you looked at the manufacturer brochure in the glove box, the skepticism from the crowd made perfect sense. The specification sheet read like a surrender flag in the horsepower wars of the early 1970s. The engine was the A12, a microscopic 1.2-liter inline-4. The official output was rated at 69 horsepower. This was the optimistic SAE gross rating, meaning the real-world power delivered to the wheels was likely even lower. On paper, this car was designed to merge cautiously onto highways, not tear down a drag strip. A stock version took nearly 20 seconds to cover the quarter mile. By conventional standards, it was painfully slow. But then the amber lights on the tree drop. The driver revs the little engine until it screams at a pitch that sounds nothing like the deep rumble of its competitor. The clutch releases, and something impossible happens. The little Datsun does not bog down. It does not stall. It leaps. It launches with a violence that defies its diminutive physical size. For the first 60 feet, it is not just keeping up with the V8 in the other lane. It is pulling ahead. The laughter in the stands dies instantly. By the time they cross the finish line, the result is often too close for comfort, or, in many amateur bracket classes, the Datsun actually takes the win. This moment represents more than just a race result. It was a sociological shock. In the automotive landscape of 1971, speed was culturally understood to be expensive, heavy, and American. The idea that a budget Japanese import could embarrass a domestic muscle car created a severe cognitive dissonance for the casual observer. They were watching a vehicle with the displacement of a large motorcycle engine challenge the kings of the road. It defied the established hierarchy of the automotive world. The shock was not just that the car was fast, but that it broke the rules of what a fast car was supposed to look like. Observers were left asking how this was possible. They assumed the car must have a secret engine swap or illegal modifications hidden under the hood. But the truth was far more interesting and subtle. The Datsun 1200 was not fast because it possessed raw power. It was fast because it was a mechanical paradox. The nominal 69 horsepower rating was a distraction that hid the truth. Beneath that economy car sheet, metal lay a triad of engineering mastery that Nissan had quietly built into the chassis. This car succeeded because it exploited physics in ways the big muscle cars could not. It relied on extreme mass minimization, weighing in at a featherweight 1,640 pounds. It utilized an engine architecture so over-engineered, it could withstand abuse that would shatter a V8, featuring racing-grade components like 5 main bearings and a forged steel crankshaft. And it applied aggressive drivetrain gearing that multiplied its meager torque into a launch force that stunned the competition. The physics of featherweight engineering. To understand why a vehicle with less horsepower than a modern lawn tractor could embarrass V8 muscle cars, you have to look past the engine bay and focus on the scale. The single most consequential number on the Datsun 1200 specification sheet was not its horsepower, torque, or displacement. It was the curb weight. The 1971 Datsun 1200 Coupe weighed in at exactly 1,640 pounds. In the context of 1971, this figure was an anomaly. The American automotive industry was moving in the opposite direction. Domestic manufacturers were adding mass at an alarming rate, burdened by increasing luxury demands, sound deadening, and the nascent stages of federal safety mandates. While Detroit was building land yachts that pushed 4,000 pounds, Nissan delivered a chassis that was essentially a motorized tin can. But in the world of drag racing, mass is the enemy of motion, and the Datsun 1200 had almost no enemies. The mechanical advantage here is rooted in the fundamental concept of inertia. Inertia is the resistance of any physical object to any change in its velocity. To visualize this, imagine standing behind a boulder and trying to push it. It requires an immense amount of energy just to get it to roll 1 inch. Now, imagine pushing a skateboard. A gentle tap sends it flying across the room. The heavy American muscle cars of the era were the boulders. They possessed massive engines, but they were burdened by their own lethargy. They required a significant portion of their energy simply to overcome their own resting state. The Datsun was the skateboard. Because it carried so little mass, it required a fraction of the energy to initiate acceleration. This is why the modest torque of the A12 engine could be utilized with such startling efficiency. This low mass created a phenomenon known as the power-to-weight multiplier effect. This is where the math gets exciting for a tuner. In a heavy vehicle, adding horsepower yields a linear, often disappointing return on investment. If you take a 4,000-pound muscle car that already has high horsepower, and you manage to tune an additional 20 horsepower out of the engine, the effect on performance is negligible. The power-to-weight ratio might shift from 16 pounds per horsepower down to roughly 15.3 pounds per horsepower. You have spent money and time for a fractional improvement that you can barely feel in the driver's seat. The Datsun 1200 changes the equation entirely. Because the baseline mass is so low, every single horsepower you add does exponentially more work. A stock Datsun 1200 starts with a power-to-weight ratio of about 24.1 pounds per horsepower. This is not fast. However, if a tuner adds that same 20 horsepower to the Datsun engine, bringing the total to roughly 90 horsepower, the ratio collapses. It drops all the way down to 18.2 pounds per horsepower. By adding the same amount of power, the heavy car gains a fraction of a second, but the Datsun gains a completely different personality. That 20 horsepower increase represents a 24.5% improvement in the vehicle's available acceleration ratio. This is the mathematical secret behind the shock factor. A garage mechanic working on a Datsun 1200 received a superior return on their engineering investment compared to the guy working on a Chevelle. The lightweight chassis acted as a magnifying glass, amplifying even the smallest engine modifications into serious forward momentum. This lack of weight did not imply a lack of strength. The B110 platform was surprisingly rigid. The engineering provided a stable structure that did not flex or twist significantly under load, which is critical when you start adding power. If the chassis were flimsy, that extra energy would be lost twisting the metal frame. Instead, the Datsun 1200 remained composed. This structural integrity, combined with its featherweight status, meant that the chassis itself was the ultimate performance part. Engineering, the indestructible heart. To understand the mechanical paradox of the Datsun 1200, one must look deep inside the engine bay at a piece of machinery that, by all external appearances, had no business on a racetrack. The power plant in question was the Nissan A12. It was a 1,171 cubic centimeter inline 4-cylinder engine, featuring a traditional overhead valve configuration. On the surface, this was technology dating back to the post-war era. It was small, visually simple, and designed primarily to sip fuel while ferrying commuters to work. However, this modest exterior concealed an internal architecture that was radically over-engineered for its intended price point. In the early 1970s, the economy car segment was defined by cost-cutting. Manufacturers constantly looked for ways to shave pennies off production costs. One of the most common methods was to simplify the bottom end of the engine. Many competitors in the subcompact class utilized engines with cast iron crankshafts supported by only 3 main bearings. A 3-bearing design is cheaper to manufacture and perfectly adequate for a car that never exceeds highway speeds. But Nissan took a different approach with the A12. They built it with a level of durability typically reserved for high-performance sports cars or heavy-duty machinery. The A12 block housed a forged steel crankshaft. Forging aligns the grain structure of the metal, creating a component significantly stronger and more resistant to fatigue than the cast iron equivalents found in rival engines. Even more critical was the way this crankshaft was secured. Nissan engineers equipped the A12 with 5 main bearings. This means the crankshaft was supported between every single cylinder. The distinction between 3 and 5 main bearings is technical, but the implication for performance is profound. At high rotational speeds, a crankshaft undergoes immense stress and can actually begin to flex or whip. A 3-bearing setup allows for more of this flex, which leads to vibration, bearing failure, and ultimately a catastrophic engine explosion if pushed too hard. The 5-bearing design of the A12 eliminated this instability. It provided a rigid, unshakable foundation that allowed the engine to spin to revolutions per minute far beyond what the tachometer redline suggested. This was an engine that did not just tolerate high RPM, it thrived on it. Nissan was fully aware of the potential they had baked into this block. They proved it themselves with the release of the factory-tuned A12GX variant. By increasing the compression ratio to 10:1 and equipping the engine with a dual side draft carburetors, the factory squeezed 83 horsepower out of the same 1.2-liter displacement. This GX model was a clear signal to the automotive world that the A-Series engine was not merely a grocery getter. It was a platform capable of handling increased cylinder pressures and higher thermal loads without compromising its structural integrity. This factory validation opened the floodgates for amateur tuners. Drag racers realized that the bottom end of the engine was virtually indestructible under normal tuning conditions. They did not need to spend thousands of dollars reinforcing the block or swapping out the crankshaft. The factory parts were already race-ready. The most transformative modification involved breathing. The stock A12 was choked by a single small carburetor designed for fuel economy. Tuners remedied this by bolting on a pair of Italian-designed Weber 40 DCOE carburetors. The addition of twin Webers, often paired with a hotter camshaft and ported cylinder heads, dramatically altered the engine's volumetric efficiency. The engine could finally ingest the massive volume of air and fuel it needed to support high RPM operation. With these period-correct modifications, the humble A12 could be pushed to produce 100 horsepower. While 100 horsepower sounds modest in a vacuum, it brings us back to the crucial physics of the B110 chassis. When you place a 100 horsepower engine into a car that weighs only 1,640 pounds, the power-to-weight ratio drops to approximately 16.4 pounds per horsepower. To put that figure into perspective, it sits squarely in the territory of the Datsun 240Z, a dedicated 6-cylinder sports car of the same era. The secret of mechanical leverage. In the world of drag racing, torque is the currency of the realm. It is the twisting force that initiates movement, planting the rear tires into the asphalt and shoving the vehicle forward against the resistance of gravity and inertia. The kings of the quarter mile, the big block V80S, generated this force through sheer displacement, churning out 300, 400, or even 500 foot-pounds of torque at the flywheel. Against this backdrop, the Datsun 1200 arrived with a deficit that seemed insurmountable. The A12 engine produced a peak of only 70 foot-pounds of torque. By the numbers, the Datsun should have been left motionless on the starting line, unable to overcome its own resting state while the muscle cars roared away. However, the engine output is only half of the equation. The force that actually rotates the rear wheels and propels the car is not the same figure measured at the flywheel. Between the engine and the pavement lies the drivetrain, a system of gears that acts as a mechanical lever. Just as a long lever allows a human to lift a heavy rock, aggressive gearing allows a small engine to move a car with surprising violence. The Datsun engineers understood this principle perfectly, and they equipped the B110 chassis with a drivetrain strategy that acted as a massive force multiplier. The first component of this strategy was the transmission. The Datsun 1200 utilized the F4W56 4-speed manual gearbox. While a 4-speed was standard for the era, the specific ratios chosen for the internal gears were calibrated for urgent acceleration rather than relaxed cruising. First gear in this transmission featured a ratio of 3.757 to 1. This is an exceptionally short gear, meaning the engine spins nearly 4 times for every single rotation of the transmission output shaft. This design prioritizes immediate torque delivery over top speed. The second component was the differential. The final drive ratio is the last point of multiplication before power reaches the axles. In many economy cars or highway cruisers of the 1970s, manufacturers utilized tall final drive ratios, such as 3.0 to 1, to keep engine RPM low at highway speeds for fuel efficiency. The Datsun 1200, however, used a 3.90 to 1 final drive ratio. This is a ratio typically associated with performance vehicles or trucks designed for towing, not economy coupes. When you combine the transmission gearing with the final drive, you arrive at the most critical number in the Datsun's drag racing arsenal, the overall reduction ratio. By multiplying the first gear ratio of 3.757 by the final drive ratio of 3.90, you get an overall ratio of 14.652 to 1. This number is the mathematical explanation for the car's launch capability. This ratio meant that for every 1 revolution of the rear tires, the tiny A12 engine was spinning nearly 15 times. This massive reduction ratio acted as a torque multiplier. While the engine only produced 70 foot-pounds at the crank, the gearing magnified that force substantially by the time it reached the wheels. The drivetrain traded top-end speed, which is irrelevant in the first 60 feet of a race, for a massive surplus of twisting force. This mechanical leverage completely altered the dynamics of the launch. When the light turned green and the driver released the clutch, that 14 to 1 multiplication hit the rear axle instantly. Because the car weighed only 1,640 pounds, the magnified torque did not have to fight against a heavy chassis. The result was a sensation of leaping. The Datsun would jump off the line with immediate, urgent traction. Contrast this with a high-horsepower V8 in the other lane. The muscle car possessed massive torque, but it was often hampered by taller gearing and significantly more weight. Furthermore, excessive torque often broke traction, causing the tires to spin and smoke rather than grip. The Datsun, with its precise torque multiplication and lack of inertia, simply hooked up and went. In the critical first 60 feet of the track, the little economy car was operating at peak efficiency and translating every ounce of its modest power into forward motion through the magic of gearing. This aggressive mechanical advantage allowed the Datsun to cover the initial distance of the race before the larger, more powerful cars could overcome their own weight and traction issues, creating the visual shock that baffled spectators for decades. The giant killer arrives. The spectacle of the Datsun 1200 winning at the drag strip transcended simple mechanics and entered the realm of psychological warfare. In the early 1970s, the drag strip was a cultural stronghold of American muscle, a place where hierarchy was determined by cylinder count and displacement. The arrival of the Datsun 1200 disrupted this ecosystem. When a massive V8 muscle car lined up against the tiny Japanese coupe, the expectation was a slaughter. The crowd anticipated the thunder of the domestic engine to drown out the foreign import. But when the Datsun launched hard and crossed the line first, the result was not just a loss for the muscle car driver, it was a humiliation. This phenomenon gave rise to the V8 Slayer narrative. This title was not bestowed because the Datsun 1200 was faster than a top-fuel dragster, but because it frequently embarrassed the entry-level and poorly tuned V8s that populated local tracks. The cognitive dissonance was palpable. Spectators were watching a vehicle that sounded like a sewing machine defeat vehicles that sounded like thunderstorms. The visual disparity between the two cars, one weighing nearly 2 tons and the other barely tipping the scales over 1,600 pounds, made the victory seem impossible. It forced the automotive community to confront the reality that efficiency could triumph over excess. While the drag strip provided the anecdotal evidence of the car's prowess, the true validation of the B110 platform occurred on one of the world's most punishing racetracks. To prove that the Datsun 1200 was more than just a quarter-mile fluke, Nissan took the car to the hardy Ferodo 500 at Mount Panorama in Bathurst, Australia. This was an endurance race that destroyed lesser vehicles. It required cars to run at maximum output for 500 miles across a mountain circuit, featuring steep elevations and long straights that tested the absolute limits of engine durability. In the crucible of Bathurst, the Datsun 1200 cemented its legend. Competing in Class A, which was reserved for vehicles under 1,300 cc or a specific low price point, the Datsun became the undisputed king. It secured class victories in 1970, 1972, and 1973. These were not narrow wins. They were demonstrations of supremacy. The Datsun 1200 did not just beat its direct competitors. It often outlasted vehicles in higher classes that succumbed to the brutal conditions of the mountain. The secret to this endurance success brought the narrative back to the engine's over-engineering. In a long-distance race, speed is useless without reliability. Many competitors push their engines to the breaking point, trying to maintain pace, resulting in blown gaskets, thrown rods, and overheated blocks. The Datsun A12 engine, however, was built with that critical margin of safety. The forged steel crankshaft and 5 main bearings allowed the drivers to pin the tachometer at 6,000 RPM for hours on end without fear of catastrophic failure. Reliability became a weapon. The Datsun 1200 won by simply refusing to brake. While high-strung European rivals and stressed domestic engines retired to the pits with steam pouring from their hoods, the Datsun continued to lap the field. The legacy of lightweight speed. The story of the Datsun 1200 does not end in the 1970s. While the specific context of the muscle car era has faded, the laws of physics that made the B110 chassis a legend remain immutable. Today, the Datsun 1200 has transcended its origins as a vintage economy car to become a preferred platform for extreme speed builds. The chassis itself remains the ultimate variable in the performance equation, proving that the engineering choices made by Nissan half a century ago are still valid today. Modern drag racers have realized that the featherweight shell is the perfect host for high-output drivetrains that the original engineers could never have imagined. In the world of import drag racing, it is common to see Datsun 1200 UTEs equipped with turbocharged Mazda 12A rotary engines. These vehicles, still utilizing the fundamental architecture of the B110, are capable of tearing down the quarter mile in the 7-second range. That is hypercar territory achieved by a 50-year-old utility vehicle. Similarly, the platform has found new life in the electric vehicle community. Builders are dropping high-torque electric motors into the engine bay, leveraging the distinct lack of mass to achieve rapid 14-second passes with near-silent efficiency. Whether it is a 400-horsepower modern turbo swap or a battery-powered dragster, the common denominator is the B110 chassis. This enduring legacy confirms the technical truth behind the headline. The Datsun 1200 shocked the world, not because it was powerful, but because it was a triumph of engineering depth. The nominal 70 horsepower rating was a deception. It hid the reality of a machine that was optimized for acceleration through mass minimization, drivetrain aggression, and mechanical resilience. Nissan provided the perfect ingredients: a 1,600-pound body, a forged steel crankshaft, and a gearbox designed to multiply torque. The triumph of engineering depth. The enduring legacy of the 1971 Datsun 1200 is ultimately a lesson in perspective. When automotive enthusiasts looked at the 69 horsepower rating on the spec sheet, they saw a limitation. They saw a slow fragility economy car destined for the slow lane. But history has proven that this number was deceptive. It was not a lie in the mathematical sense, as the engine truly produced that output in its stock form, but it was a lie of omission. The raw number failed to account for the brilliance of the system that contained it. Nissan did not simply build a car. They constructed a calculated exercise in efficiency. The Datsun 1200 succeeded because it adhered to a formula that prioritized engineering depth over brute force. The foundation was the 1,640-pound chassis, which ensured that inertia was negligible. The heart was the over-engineered A12 engine, featuring a forged steel crankshaft and 5 main bearings that offered the resilience to survive the violence of racing. The delivery system was the transmission, calibrated to multiply torque and mask the engine's modest output. These 3 factors combined to create a vehicle where the nominal horsepower rating was merely a starting point. For the tuners and racers of the era, the Datsun 1200 offered an unmatched return on investment. Every ounce of power added to the engine was amplified by the lightweight body and aggressive gearing, allowing a budget commuter to humiliate larger, more expensive rivals. This vehicle represented a quiet but significant shift in automotive philosophy. While the muscle car era attempted to solve the problem of speed, with more displacement and heavier iron, the Datsun 1200 solved it with better engineering. It stands today as a permanent reminder that in the pursuit of performance, efficiency is just as formidable as raw power. The shock at the drag strip was never a fluke. It was the inevitable result of a machine designed to do more with less.